as someone who used to work in special education, who's worked in disability advocacy, this story has been plaguing my mind and hurting my heart because in Maryland, 3 times a week on average, a police car pulls up to a school in Wicomico County on Maryland's Eastern Shore. The student is brought out, handcuffed, and placed inside for transport to a hospital emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation. Over the past 8 years, the process has been used at least 750 times on students, some of them as young as 5 years old. AP reported the state law that allows for these removals, known as petitions for emergency evaluation, is meant to be limited to people with severe mental illness who are endangering their own lives or safety or someone else's life. It's the first step toward getting someone involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital. But advocates say schools across the country are sending children to the emergency room for psychiatric evaluations in response to behaviors prompted by bullying or frustration over assignments. The ER trips, they say, often follow months, sometimes years of their needs not being met. Black students are more frequently subjected to these removals than their peers, according to available data. Advocates point to students with disabilities also being removed at higher rates. Schools in Wicomico County agreed not to misuse emergency petitions as part of a 2017 settlement with the United States Department of Justice. But while the number of suspensions and expulsions declined, mandated trips to emergency room ticked up. Last year, children were handcuffed and sent to the emergency room at least 117 times from Wicomico schools, about once per every 100 students, according to data obtained from public records requests to the Wicomico County Sheriff's Office. At least 40% were 12 or younger. More than half were Black children, even though a little more than a third of Wicomico public school children are Black. More from that report. In interviews, dozens of students, parents, educators, lawyers, and advocates for students with disabilities in the county said a lack of resources and trained staff combined with a punitive culture in some schools are behind the misuse of emergency petitions. And we'll get into some horrifying testimony from parents and students who this has happened to in just a second. But I'll add, we've discussed now several times on this show just today, how punitive actions to enforce, discipline in schools are being taken to the detriment of the students in those schools. And I'll just add my personal input as someone who worked in an alternative school while I was in college. I worked with students who had disabilities. I've been trained in therapeutic crisis intervention. It's not easy. It's a hard job. I got hit. I got spit on. But I was the adult in that scenario, and I had training to deal with those situations, to disarm the situation, to help de-escalate the situation. And I knew that even though that job was hard, I took that job and I had a duty to those children to do that. But I also saw peers who were a lot less willing to engage in that work, to do what was hard, who wanted to call the police when a student was misbehaving because they didn't want to have to go through the difficult process and the steps of de-escalation. They didn't want to do that work. And just seeing it in the microcosm of the school I worked in made me horrified of what might be going on all across the country. And this article has only confirmed it, because it's not just happening here in this one county in Maryland. It's happening all across the country. And Dina, I'll just bring you in here, before we get into the specific comments from the parents about what's going on. I mean, the trauma that's being inflicted on these kids by being handcuffed and put in the back of cop cars as if they're criminals, when they might just be getting bullied and, responding to the bullying.
Yeah, this was definitely very disturbing. And the point about that there being a settlement, and 2017 with the Department of Justice means that there was a finding by the Department of Justice that they were misusing these petitions. And that's why they had to agree to not use them. So, and we can see it in the facts too. I mean, the mental health crisis in this country is real. We should not minimize it. Like, we need to desperately do more because it is hurting. Children, teenagers, adults. It's a major crisis. And I do think schools could play a role in being partners. Sometimes families don't recognize the signs either because of lack of awareness around it or denial. There's so much shame around it. So they're ideally they would be partners and would have conversations with families. But some of those facts, the fact that most of them were under 12, we know psychiatric conditions usually happen much older. They tend to come out in the later teen years. So that's an odd fact. And that it was disproportionately Black children, where the statistics are not that Black children are disproportionately more mentally ill. That's not true. So those facts were like a mismatch of what you would think psychiatric disorders would show in the children. So that's probably part of the reason why the DOJ found that they were misusing it. And it sounds like continuing to misuse it, which is just, I think, is so horrible, not only for those children who have to go through this, but horrible for the true need that there is to help out children and families who have undiagnosed psychiatric conditions or untreated psychiatric conditions who really need our help. But when you're misusing the power that the state has given you in order to try to help these kids and using it for punitive purposes, for discipline, it's like a double mockery. You're hurting these kids and then you're failing the kids who need help. It's a sad story.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that, the lack of funding public education, the low pay for crucial workers like social workers and who provide essential services to these kids is playing no small part in this. Too large of classroom sizes with bad student to teacher ratios, not to excuse the use of these, but just to add context. And it's mortifying. And what's really mortifying is what these children and what the parents are saying is happening to them. Because one Wicomico mom who asked for anonymity because she feared retaliation from the school. She feared retaliation from the school for talking about the mistreatment of her child. The school should not have the power to retaliate against her for being open and honest about what happened. That should be scary. Recall the terror she felt when her son's school called and said they were going to have him assessed for a forced psychiatric hospitalization. When she arrived at the school, she said her son was already in handcuffs. He was put in the back of a police car and taken to the hospital. He said his wrists hurt from the handcuffs. The mother said he was just really quiet, just sitting there. He didn't understand why he was in the hospital. Wicomico teenager described a years-long process of becoming alienated from school with an emergency petition as the ultimate break. He said he was bullied in middle school over a series of months until one day he snapped and hit the student who had been taunting him. School called the police. He told the officers not to touch him and that he needed to calm down. Instead, the officers grabbed him and shoved him into the ground, he said. He was handcuffed and transported to the emergency room. But when he returned, he said the only thing that was different was how he felt about the adults in the building. I got used to not trusting people, not talking to people at school, he said. Nothing else really changed. And that is a story of how this school ruined his experience in education, deprived him of this important time of his life where he could be socializing, where he should be learning, and instead he's just withdrawn. He goes to school, he sits there silently, he gets bullied. He feels apprehensive about the adults, not just in his school now, but in his life. And he's going to carry that with him, that distrust. And it's entirely the fault of the school in overutilizing calling the police, which, is something that should be an absolute last resort in situations where there's actual danger to that child, to, the other children. This is just, Dina, disappointing. The whole thing is so disheartening and disappointing.
I mean, absolutely. And we have to just get the police department out of mental health, period. I mean,
Mhm.
we see it again. In just interactions with, we see family members of a mentally ill person calling the police because they know nobody else to call. And then the police comes and shoots and kills their mentally ill relative. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've talked on, TV about an iteration of that story. It's because we have a complete lack of resources of how to deal with mentally ill people in this country. And it's a huge failing for people who need help. And that's why, like I said, this story pains me even more because the state tried to put something in place to help. They shouldn't be putting a police officer. There should be another separate type of department who goes and helps somebody who's truly mentally ill. But that was described, that student was not mental illness at all. And so for him to kind of get swept up into what was supposed to be a well-meaning policy, like you said, of probably people who didn't want to do the hard work. It's not easy dealing with children. It's not easy dealing with children who maybe don't want to do what you want to do or whatever. But that's not an excuse to, as you said, completely take away his civil rights, his dignity, traumatize him and his family, and really, harm his education the way that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. An excellent point about how this extends just beyond the school and how we treat mental health or perceived mental health, issues or episodes in day-to-day interactions, and how that's criminalized as well. This country needs to completely overhaul the way that we talk about and treat mental health, and maybe we can actually get some meaningful change.